All right. Well, welcome to Monday Night Anatomy. So my name's Drew. If it's your first time here, welcome. This is the actual first one we're doing. So we're going to be reviewing every Monday, 7 o'clock, some anatomy. It's a movement anatomy, so it's very functional, movement focused, health orientated. So we're going to be looking at the musculoskeletal system particularly, and then we're going to be breaking down the muscles and what they do, and then just kind of like really kind of bring it back to grassroots functional anatomy. So if you want to understand movement, want to understand exercise, whether it's yoga, whether it's Pilates, whether it's kettlebell training, whether it's lifting weights, calisthenics, whatever it is that you practice, if you want to understand at a deeper level about what's going on, then we just learn the anatomy. And the anatomy explains heaps of stuff that happens with your body. So this is the whole idea. So today we're going to look at this awesome muscle called the glute medius, and we're going to explore its attachments on the skeletal system. So where it goes, where it goes to, the action of the muscle, so how it moves the joint, which joint it moves, and then in which ways the actual leg and the hip move together. So let's get into it. All right. So I'm going to stop this share. And then we'll go to share screen. Let's go to complete anatomy, share that. And we're in the complete anatomy. So this is an amazing app that I use to teach my anatomy students. So if you just type in complete anatomy in your Google search bar, you'll come to it. It's an awesome company that have various different products. So you can jump in and learn some anatomy. Okay, so let's have a look at the glute medius. So we start off with origin. So the origin is usually where the muscle attaches onto the bone or the starting location. And so in this case, we've kind of got the ilium. So this purple bone here, when it highlights or green, this is the pelvis. And this kind of ridge here is the iliac crest. And the line underneath that's called the superior gluteal line. So this whole ridge on the pelvis is where your glute med attaches. And you can see how thick it is. It's not just one spot, it's the whole ridge, and it's connected to that kind of big flat shaped piece of the bone of the pelvis there. So that's the origin or the proximal attachment. And then it comes down here onto the femur. So this is the femur or your big leg bone. And then it attaches onto the top part of the femur called the greater trochanter, which is this bony bit here. See this kind of knobbly bit here. So this is called the greater trochanter. Okay. So you have it going from the pelvis onto your leg bone. Other key things to kind of know is that the nerve that innervates it is this little one here, the superior gluteal nerve. Highlights, it'll highlight in a second. We can get the right angle. There, superior gluteal nerve. So, and it kind of comes out of this kind of sacral plexus. So coming out from these sacral foramens. It's not the sciatic nerve, it's its own nerve branch. So this big boy here, this is the sciatic nerve coming down the leg. Okay, that's the sciatic nerve. So the glute medius isn't innervated by the sciatic nerve, it's got its own nerve supply, which if we kind of go to branches, so we go back to the muscle, origin insertion, where's the nerve supply? So it's not actually showing me there. So if I go back to the gluteal nerve, so that's kind of where it sits there. So that's feeding into all these different parts of the glute medius in there. And that comes out from the sacral plexus through here under what's called, this is the sciatic nut. So we've got the sciatic nerve coming down through here as well. All right, so this nerve kind of orientates from the lower back, so the L4, L5 region. So if you've got something kind of going on in the lower back here, you can get these muscles affected. So you can get like tension, tightness, hypertonic muscles. You can get like spasm, particularly if the neural feed is getting kind of impinged or compressed. So we don't want that. So often a pain in the glutes here can be coming from the lower back. And this is kind of highlights the function of this glute med muscle in the lower back is really, really closely linked together, because one of the primary actions of the glute med is when it contracts. And to understand a muscle, you need to kind of like think about the line of pull of the fibers. So there's a set of lines here of the orientation of the muscle fibers coming down. So when the muscles contract, those fibers slide across each other and create a pulling movement. So if you've got really good core stability, for example, and these muscles contract, this is going to be stabilized by all your core muscles, for example, and it's going to then make a pulling action on that bone. That pulling action kind of pulls the head of the femur into the socket. So it kind of like sucks it into the socket, into the acetabulum. So one of the really important roles of your glute medius is to keep your head of the femur, okay, nice and snug into the big socket of the pelvis, the acetabulum. Okay, so when your glute med is strong and it contracts, it stabilizes, you get this kind of what we call lumbopelvic stability. So this joint here is kept in good position, particularly whilst you're in gait or moving. So when you think about standing on one leg, when you stand on one leg, this muscle's contracting to kind of keep that bone, that femur, nice and snug into your femur, into the pelvis. So you've got that stability. If you've got a lower back problem and that gluteal nerve is being interfered with, maybe you've got like a disc prolapse, or there's just a lot of tension or compression, and it's causing some signaling or some kind of like neural interference to that muscle, it can go weak. And if it's weak, then you don't get that stabilization into the glute, and then you don't get that support. And then that puts a lot of pressure on this big joint here, the sacroiliac joint, and also the lumbar segments, as well as the top of the sacrum and the pelvis itself. So this is one of the really, 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 really important muscles for lower back pain and for hip pain. You get this one working nicely, then often, if it's the cause or the culprit, often lower back pain will just go away, particularly as this one gets restored back to its functional strength, where it has enough strength to be able to support your body weight in stance position, so it can keep your femur nicely, snugly orientated into the socket. So let's have a look at some of the motions of the glute medius. So we'll start with hip abduction. Give it 1 second. So here, this is kneecap here is on the front. And so you can see this is the glute medius, and it's attaching onto the femur here, and it brings your leg out to the side into what's called hip abduction. So moving the leg outwards to the side. Okay. Now, if I can peel away, fade all. Now, when you get abduction, the trochanter here, so it's moving outwards, okay, needs to clear the space of the femur here, the kind of the ridge of where the pelvis and the femur connect here. So this space here needs to clear. Depending on your anatomical structure and your abduction range, you can actually contact this bone onto that bone. And when you do that, then the bone can't move any further. Okay. The way you get around that is you turn the bone. So you rotate your feet out, or externally rotate your feet, and that spins the trochanter backwards and gives you more space, so you can get your leg further up. So as you're going out to the side, you need to kind of like externally rotate the foot, so turn the foot out to create more space. All right. If you internally rotate the foot, you'll get jammed up, and depending on your flexibility and your range of movement, you just won't be able to go any further. So understanding that's really, really helpful. So, for example, if you're doing a wide squat, take your feet wide, externally rotate your feet, which externally rotates the femur, then you give more space so you can get deeper down into your squat. If you don't do that, you'll create an impingement type situation there, which is not cool for anyone. So we don't want that. Okay, let's have a look at medial rotation. Okay, so here we're looking at the front. Now, it's always a little bit tricky. So if you have your knee bent and you rotate the shaft of the femur, so you rotate the shaft of the femur, what happens is the tibia, so the shin bone, goes outwards. So it goes out that way. Okay. All right. So that's called medial rotation. The actual femur itself is turning inward. All right. And then the bottom leg turns out. Okay. So that's medial rotation. And that happens because of the position of the glute medius attaching onto the top of the greater trochanter, the femur. So when it pulls up there, it creates that turning motion. All right, so it medially rotates. So as it pulls up through there, it's going to make the femur rotate around like that, just because of the actual angle that it's sitting on to the bone. So as it contracts, it pulls on the top of the greater trochanter and it rotates. So contracting and it rotates. Like here. So knee flexes and then it contracts and it rotates. Like so, just that bit there, that bit there. All right, so that's your internal rotation. Internal rotation or medial rotation is the same deal. So now that can change depending on the position of the femur. So you can see this big wide muscle, so it's got different lines of pull. So if it's these fibers here engaging more, it's going to lift the leg up, so the femur is going to come up, and that's going to create more abduction out to the side. If these ones are active, okay, and you can see it's got quite a slight kind of twist to it because it's touching on the top, it's going to then, as it pulls up, it's going to twist around. So it's going to create that rotation around as it's contracting, pulling up. Now, if the femur is orientated this way, it can actually reverse and create internal rotation to external rotation. So that kind of makes things a bit more complicated, just because of the orientation of the trochanter here. So you can imagine if you're like your leg was kind of, if you're doing like a glute stretch or a pigeon pose, so your knees kind of more parallel, what happens there is that instead of the greater trochanter being orientated vertically, it's orientated more horizontally. And so as it pulls up, then it rotates the femur outward or externally. So that can change. Okay. The other thing that's really kind of important to understand with glute medius is that it doesn't work in isolation. It works with a whole range of other muscles. Now, particularly the most important kind of action of stabilizing the femur into the pelvis. So when you're on weight bearing, walking, running, jumping, lunging, squatting, hinging, deadlifting, anything like that. It works with this same side oblique here, it's the internal oblique. So let me see if I can put that in for us. Oh, come back. Internal oblique. Give it a second to generate. Go right side. That's not what I wanted. Go back. Internal oblique. Where are we? Internal oblique. Right. Let's try that. Okay. Very good. So ignore all the purple. They're just muscle attachments that's showing here. But this internal oblique works with the glute medius to stabilize the acetabulum and the lumbar spine. So we have internal oblique and glute medius, often contracting together, what I call a co-contraction, to stabilize and support the pelvis and the femur together. So they work together. So one thing we want to do is as we're strengthening the glute medius, we also want to strengthen the internal oblique, and we want to strengthen them in positions where they work together. So you can think of something like a side bridge or a side plank. So you're on your elbow and you're lifting up from underneath. Okay. That engages both the glute medius and also the internal oblique here. So we want to kind of like really get those two muscles working together because of this kind of strong connection. There, I was barking like crazy. Hopefully I'll settle down in a second. The other muscle that really is involved with the glute medius is the adductors. So let me just put in adductor. So let's just put in one, adductor longus. Okay. So the adductor longus is a part of a whole group of muscles, goes off the femur, and this one goes on to the superior pubic ramus, which is the kind of the top of your pubic bone there. Okay, so these three muscles work together to create this triad of stabilization of the femur, the pelvis, and the lumbar spine, particularly when you're in stance position or when you're standing on leg. So what happens is this muscle here contracts and it's pulling the femur up in that same motion that the glute med does. So it kind of like pulls the femur into the socket. So it's got this nice snug stabilization. And there's, we've got adductor magnus, adductor brevis, a couple other big ones here. They go right down the inner leg here. So when they all work together, you get this really robust stabilization of the femur and the pelvis is what we want. Okay, so that is really important. So often when I'm working with folks who have lower back pain or some kind of impingement of the femur, or SIJ, sacroiliac pain, or sciatica. We do a lot of work in strengthening the glutes, the deep gluteal muscles, a lot of work strengthening the adductors, and a lot of work strengthening the core. So they're working together to provide stabilization for the lumbar pelvic region. So they work as a team. If you just address one on its own, you can get some pain relief, but often it doesn't last. Okay, if you're just doing massage, okay, so if you're just getting into here and just getting massage or dry needling or cupping or whatever the thing is, you can release that kind of muscular tension, but then it often comes back. So that's where we need this kind of like progressive strengthening exercises to get this muscle strong, to get the internal oblique strong, and to get the adductor strong, so we get this stabilization of the femur. Okay, and that is the glute medius. All right, so just to summarize, attaches on the pelvis, goes to the gradual canter, it abducts the hips, internally rotates the femur. Okay, it's a very mild hip flexor, as in lift the knee up towards your chest, but doesn't really do a lot in terms of hip flexion. Can be a little bit involved in hip extension, but its primary role is stabilization. So drawing that femur into the pelvis. It has two other muscles that work with it, internal oblique and the adductor complex, so lots of adductor muscles here to help facilitate that stabilization of the femoral acetabular joint, often called the FA joint. So femur, acetabulum, FA joint. All right, when that one's working well, okay, it essentially can eliminate problems in lunging, squatting, hinging, jumping, running, because this is the biggest joint in the body and we want it stable and we want it functional. All right, okay, let's go back here. Let's take away some of these nerves, get rid of that. We'll take away some of this stuff. I don't know why everything went purple. This is a great app, but sometimes it gets a little bit kind of makes up its own mind about what it wants to do. Okay. So hope you enjoyed a little brief kind of anatomy overview of the glute medius. We're going to continue next Monday night looking at glute maximus, so the big powerhouse muscle. And we kind of like start to tie these muscles together. So we have glute maximus, glute minimus, and glute medius. Glute minimus is basically glute medius's little brother. They work together, medius and minimus work together, but glute max is the power one. And we really want that bad boy strong because that's the one that creates us all the forward drive and the lifting, so we can kind of move correctly. All right, so we'll see you then. Cheers. Let's pause, stop share, and